this mic.
Where?
Or they're the East Coast somewhere. I'll have to look her up. But anyway,
Oh my gosh.
just
Hmm. You made a good decision, sweetheart. Stay away from academia.
Good morning. My name is Felicia Orth, a hearing officer appointed by the Water Quality Control Commission to conduct a hearing in the matter of proposed rule 20.6.8, New Mexico Administrative Code. This is ground and surface water protection, supplemental requirements for reuse, docketed by the Commission Administrator as WQCC 23-84. We are on the second day this week and the seventh day overall in this hearing. We expect to go more days this week. This is the third public comment opportunity this week. There'll be another one at 1 p.m. today, 9 a.m. and 1 p.m. tomorrow as well. We'll continue that pattern for as many days as we are in hearing. The record is being recorded and transcribed on a virtual platform and also by Kim Charlenbard, the court reporter. It's also being interpreted between Spanish and English and Spanish by Lisa O'Grady and her team of interpreters. Lisa, would you like to say something?
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. If there's anyone present in the hearing room that would like to have an interpreter, please come forward and I will give you the headsets. Si hay alguien aquí presente que quisiera ocupar interpretación, por favor, pase adelante y yo le entrego con mucho gusto el equipo. If there's anybody online who would like to use the interpreter services, at the bottom of your screen on the left-hand side, there's a globe. Please click on the globe.
And press the button on the microphone there so it turns green. Okay. And if you would state and spell your first and last name for the record.
Yes, I am Abigail, Abigail, Shepherd, Shepard.
Okay, thank you. And do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
Yes,
Okay, I'm going to start your 3 minutes.
okay. From Santa Fe County, New Mexico. I am here today to urge you to oppose the proposed rulemaking on water reuse regulations as outlined as the ground and surface water protection supplemental requirements for water reuse. I am the child of a breast cancer survivor. My mom was diagnosed when I was in 2nd grade, and while I had no concept of what cancer was at that age, I saw firsthand how it devastates the body and weighs on a family. Thankfully, my mom has made it through treatment and is still alive today, but there are thousands each year, including hundreds in New Mexico, who don't. This experience motivated me to hold industries accountable that are pouring carcinogens into our environment and homes, making us sick and making it much more likely for us to develop cancer. I bring this up because this proposed rule to reuse toxic radioactive liquid in projects across New Mexico would allow the oil and gas industry to pour carcinogens into our environment, a recipe for cancer across the state. And it's not just cancer. This rule is an absolute disaster for public health. Oil and gas wastewater is toxic, radioactive, and poses serious risks to public health and the environment. So-called produced water often contains numerous radioactive compounds, including uranium, plutonium, radium, thorium, and polonium. Exposure to these radioactive compounds can cause bone, liver, and breast cancers. We also know that oil and gas liquid waste contains PFAS, also known as forever chemicals. PFAS exposure is linked to a wide range of serious health issues, including kidney and testicular cancer, endocrine disruption, and immune system suppression. Oil and gas wastewater has been known to have contaminants and heavy metals like arsenic and lead. Contaminants like arsenic and lead have been associated with health risks such as skin, lung, bladder, kidney, and liver cancers and neurological disorders. Given the glaring lack of scientific standards, including the fact that there are no scientifically proven standards for effective treatment of so-called produced water, the likelihood that more New Mexicans will experience multiple of the aforementioned health issues like cancer is not just extremely high, it's pretty much certain. That's because not only does the rule not contain minimum standards for the treatment, handling, or disposal of the waste, standards to treat this toxic waste and make it safe don't even exist. And once our water is contaminated, there is no going back. And in sum, this is not just an experiment with our water, it's an experiment on our health. No matter what we look like or where we come from, we want our loved ones to be able to drink clean water and live in healthy environments. This unscientific rule would make this vision impossible. Again, I demand the Water Quality Control Commission to act in its full capacity to reject the proposed rulemaking on water reuse regulations. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Shepherd. The next name I have on the list is Jeanette Icecat or Iscat.
Good morning, Jeanette Iscat.
Ms. Icecat, are you on the platform?
I am. Can you hear me?
Speak up again.
I am on the platform. Jeanette Iscat.
Okay, I'm not hearing. I'm sorry, we're not hearing you. Give us just a moment.
Okay.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
No, she's not muted. We can see the microphone is green. Nope, now it's
Can you
not.
hear me?
Now it is.
We can hear you online, just so you know. I think it's a problem in the hearing room.
Oh, they can hear on WebEx?
Yes, we can hear her.
Okay,
know if there's
so
something else I
Ms.
should be
Iscott,
doing.
we're
To me,
working
it
with
seems
the
like
audio
Some
controls
of
here in
the
the
fellow
room.
platform users say in the chat that they can hear me okay.
Yes, we just couldn't hear you here in the room. So thank you very much for your patience. If you would please spell your first and last name for the transcript. Could you hear me? Ma'am? Can you hear me now?
Jeanette, can you hear me?
I think I could just hear somebody say my name.
Yeah, I just said your
Oh.
name. They're trying to speak to you now from the hearing room.
Oh, okay, thank you. So if you would please state and spell your first and last name.
Okay. My name is Jeanette Iscat, Jeanette. Last name Iskat. Can you hear that?
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much. And do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
Okay, I'm going to speak with the assumption that you can hear me. You sound very faint to me. Okay.
Okay. Do you swear
I'm
or
speaking to
affirm to tell
you
the truth?
from northern New Mexico, from
Okay.
Villanueva, part of the Pecos watershed. I'm part of a community farm out here. I vend regularly at my farmer's market, and I'm here to speak in opposition to this rule and asking this water protection agency to do its work. We cannot unpoison our waters. We are already seeing so much demands on the waters of the state. And as somebody who works with our acequias, the shared waters held by community out here, we cannot unpoison this water. We cannot allow this manufactured new water and junk science to continue in New Mexico. Our water is already so very scarce here. And we have seen in New Mexico historically how water has been poisoned and even weaponized against the population. The Trinity downwinders in the south of this state are 5 generations deep in cancer clusters, have never been compensated. Once we go forward with creating this manufactured water, we can't go back. We cannot heal waters that are so damaged. It is unsafe at every level. We have seen pictures of fracked water catching on fire, and this is what we are being asked to accept as a potential future for all of us. I've never lived in a place, and you can see behind me just how beautiful it is. And the water is key and essential to that. I ask this commission to take its work so seriously. The water wars are here, and we are here advocating for the safety of water in our state. Thank you very much for hearing us all. We ask you to do your work to keep the water safe. I know other people will speak beautifully about the science. We're here also to speak for all the creatures around us who can't speak. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Mrs. Cap. Savannah Woods. Savannah Woods. Okay, thank you. Let me ask then, first, is there anyone else in the room who would like to take this opportunity to offer public comment? There will be other chances. No. And then on the platform, is there anyone on the platform who would like to take this opportunity to offer public comment? No? All right, we're going to return to the technical case then, and I will invite public comment again at 1 p.m. today. Thank you all for that. So, let's see, I don't see Ms. Nanasi. Mr. Dodd? Okay. So this morning I know Commissioner Patton is joining us today. I think the rest of you were here yesterday. We're going to begin with Ms. Nanasi's witness, Mr. Noble, on behalf of New Energy Economy. And then because their third witness, Dr. Van Gogh, is going to be here tomorrow, we're going to spend the rest of the day with NMOGA's witnesses, the witnesses of the New Mexico Oil and Gas Association. And let me ask if there are any other preliminary matters we can talk about. I did see Commissioner Rosatos online. Is there any other commissioner online whom I haven't seen? Oh, I see
Good
Mr.
morning.
Maxwell. Good morning.
Good morning. This is Jonas Armstrong, Commissioner Armstrong on the call.
I'm sorry, I was unable to make that out.
This is Commissioner Armstrong, Jonas on the call.
Okay.
I am on my
Thank
way
you.
into Santa Fe now.
Okay, thank you. You're on our screen as call-in user 1. So I'm glad you identified yourself. Vice Chair Armstrong is online, and I see Commissioner Rosatos.
Madam Hearing Officer, I apologize. Did you need something specific? It was broken on my side.
Oh, no. I was just essentially noting who's on the platform versus
Okay.
who's in the room.
I'm present.
But thank you for that.
Thank you.
Mr. Dodd.
Good morning, Madam Hearing Officer. Ms. Nanasi and Mr. Noble are running a bit behind this morning. Mr. Noble's flight was delayed and he didn't get in until the wee hours last night. And of course, his flight was diverted from Santa Fe to Albuquerque.
Crazy.
It was a mess. And so Ms. Nanasi greatly apologizes for the delay, but she said she'll be over here as soon as she possibly can. They're just at the office preparing a couple of things.
Okay, so we're talking minutes, not...
Probably, like, my guess would be 20 minutes or 30 minutes.
Okay. Let's see here then. I don't see Mr. Wexler.
I don't think they were anticipating public comment going so quickly this morning.
Sure, we never know. We take all comers. All right. In that case, can anyone think of another good use of this time other than just going straight to a break?
Madam Hearing Officer, this is Mr. Maxwell. There's time allotted for opening statements from a few parties still, including myself.
Oh, okay. And you know what? Now that I'm looking up at the screen again, to see you, Mr. Maxwell, I see a hand raised by Bianca Sopochi, maybe? If I'm mispronouncing your name, I'm sorry. Ms. Sopochi, are you raising your hand in order to offer public comment?
Um, Thank you, Madam Chair. No, I wasn't raising my hand for public comment, but I did want to share that I think some people were under the impression that public comment might have been from like 9 to 10. And so while some people were able to jump on right at 9, I imagine that some people might not be able to jump on right at the top of the hour. So just maybe it sounds like people need to be present at the beginning of public hearing in order to give public comment during those hour allotments. Is that correct? So we can just inform the public?
Yes, that is absolutely the best advice because what we're doing is we are breaking into the technical case for as long as necessary to take the commenters who are present, and then we're going back to the technical case. So yeah, if someone wants to offer public comment during the 1 o'clock session, I would certainly advise them being there at 1 o'clock.
Okay, thank you, Madam
Yeah,
Chair.
but thank you for the question. Okay, so Mr. Maxwell, thank you, Mr. Dodd. If you are willing to help us make use of this time by offering an opening statement, I'd be happy to take it.
Thank you, Your Honor. I can't say I'll go for very long. I'd like to thank the commission for scheduling this public hearing and taking the public's comment. And I just would like to state that you will, during the course of this hearing, get to witness significant testimony from a variety of different perspectives. One of the perspectives you'll hear from me is that the public notice for the hearing may have been deficient, and I would submit that the cross-examination that you'll hear me perform on the New Mexico Environment Department's witnesses would present a compelling case to show that that is indeed the fact. I would submit to you that because the public notice is deficient, that the meeting should have been rescheduled and another opportunity for entries by parties to be made, and that we should not have taken the last 2 months to squander that opportunity. And so I would continue to say that I'm grateful for the opportunity to learn. So much of the Environment Department's functions are new to me, and understanding the process is a learning environment that I'm excited to be a part of. I would like to also state that commissioners should be held to the standards if they are designees, that the appointing authority that has placed them there would also have to be held to. And this is in regards to financial disclosure statements that have to be filed with the Secretary of State by state agency heads. I submit to you that state agency heads is a definition undefined, a word undefined by the law that we have called the Financial Disclosure Act, and that you will find the disclosures required of state officials encompass those who have significant power over the substantive rights of others, as well as resources of the state, such as funds. And so altogether, I would submit to you that each of the members of this commission should be happy to disclose the financial disclosure statement to the Secretary of State, as it provides for the best government for the people. At this time, I would like to conclude my opening statement, and I have nothing further to add for any technical testimony. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Maxwell, for offering that. I really appreciate it. At this time, then, I'll make one last call for public comment, just in the event someone has joined us in the last 10 minutes. Anyone at all here to offer public comment and has not already offered that comment previously in this hearing? No? All right, then we are going to be on a break. I hope that that break will be just about 15 minutes long. When we return, we hope to hear from New Energy Economy's witness, Mr. Noble. Thank you.
about some amazing things he's done. You know, I'm just so happy to have somebody who cares about free
Hello, we are back from a break. We returned to the technical case, and New Energy Economy Council Mariel Nanasi is at the witness desk with Mr. Noble. Mr. Noble, do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
Yes.
Okay, we need to get the microphone closer to you, not so close that it echoes.
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, Ms. Nanasi.
Good morning, Madam Hearing Officer, Chair, and Commissioners. I apologize profusely for being late. Just so you know, Mr. Noble was supposed to arrive at 8 o'clock and arrived at 1:30 in the morning last night. So I apologize for being late. Now I'd like to commence the continuation of our presentation to you. Could you please, sir, state your name and spell it for the record?
Justin Noble. That's JUSTINNOBEL.
Did you prepare direct technical testimony and exhibits that New Energy Economy has designated as Exhibit 2?
Yes, I did.
Is it true and correct to the best of your knowledge?
Yes.
If I were to ask you the same questions today, would you give the same answers?
Yes.
Did you prepare rebuttal technical testimony and exhibits that New Energy Economy has designated as Exhibit 5?
Yes.
If I were to ask you the same questions that appear in New Energy Economy Exhibit 5 today, would you give the same answers?
Yes.
Please provide a brief summary of your professional and educational experience.
Yeah. First, I just want to say what an honor it is to be here providing this testimony. My background is in earth and environmental science. New Mexico, when it comes to earth and the environment, is a really unique state. I've spent time here as a traveler. I've had jobs where I've worked out west in the environment. I've had family who lived in this state, and it's just an honor to be able to share this information with the committee. So I have a bachelor's degree in earth and ocean science from Duke University. A lot of my early work was with professors who work in different parts of the world. Science was a really fascinating way to learn about the world, travel to different places that were not the place I was from, which is New York. I have a dual master's degree, so that's a master's degree in earth and environmental science, and then another master's degree in journalism. That's from Columbia University. That was really an extraordinary program, which teaches you how to read science, how to actually read a scientific research paper, and how to talk to scientists. But most importantly, science is this incredible record. It goes back through time. It comes with citations, so you can actually follow a topic. And my training has really been in science journalism. I've received some nice accolades in that work. Most recently, an award from the National Association of Science Writers for an article I came out with in 2020, America's Radioactive Secret. I do a lot of writing for some what we call glossy magazines, big magazines like Rolling Stone, Popular Mechanics. Okay. And also smaller publications, investigative sites, and also literary journals as well. And recently, this past April, I published a book, Petroleum 238, Big Oil's Dangerous Secret and the Grassroots Fight to Stop It. That was the result of 7 years of work in the topic that I am presenting on here today.
Is it true that your qualifications are explained in your direct testimony as Exhibit 1?
Yes, I believe so.
I would like to just caution you to talk a little slower.
Thank you. There's a lot of
I know that-
information, so I always tend to go
Okay.
fast to get all out. But I'll slow it down a couple notches. Thank you.
Because we're not in New York anymore. So could you please provide a brief summary of your testimony?
Yeah, I'd like to start with a couple exhibits that I think we've prepared. The first would be Exhibit 22. It is an old document, so old that it's a little bit difficult to read the title, but it says Disposal of Production Division Waste by a gentleman named W.L. Martin, 1932, Pampa, Texas. So I think
Excuse me for 1 second.
Yeah.
I would just like to note for the record that we did upload a number of documents, 19 till 29 in the Dropbox. And so if commissioners would like to follow along, those are available for commissioners as well.
Thank you. And I'll explain in a moment just why I think this is so important, but I've taken the effort to highlight a portion. And essentially, this is someone who has worked in the oil field for some time, or back in the 1930s, and they're talking about waste, about oil field wastewater. And there's other oil field waste streams as well, but this is really what this hearing is about, treating oil field waste. And I'm just going to read the highlighted portion. Regardless of whether or not we consider our wastes objectionable or liable to cause damage to our neighbors or the public, the statutes of the several states make it obligatory on the producer to prevent the escape of waste from our properties. In many instances, the courts have allowed damages because of the escape of such wastes. Apparently, it is only a question of time until the opposition to the escape of our waste will become strong enough to force us as an economical measure to dispose of them in such a manner as will not be objectionable to anyone, and without doubt such disposal will also be effected at a profit. It is also apparent that we cannot escape the moral responsibility for the effect of such wastes as may interfere with the orderly conduct of business, private or public, for after all, we are the public which is affected. I think not only is that an informative statement, but there's really an elegance and a symmetry to the industry trying to do the right thing and not dispose of their waste in a way that that harms the environment and the public. And the reason I am going back to these early documents is to really cast the oil and gas industry in a different light. And I'll explain in a moment. But there's two more older documents. So the second would be Exhibit 24. This is a really interesting report coming from the Michigan Geological Survey Division. And I'll just read the title at the top: Brine Disposal is Oil Men's Headache, Salt of the Earth. And in this document, they go through, it's quite short, and they discuss different ways in which inappropriate brine disposal has contaminated the environment, water supplies, underground water supplies, surface water supplies, and led to lawsuits as well. And the one other document I'll cite now, and this was in your...
Excuse me, that was, you were referring to is Exhibit 24, is that right?
That's correct, yes. And again, the title there at the top, and it's from the Michigan Geological Survey Division: Brine Disposal is Oil Men's Headache, Salts of the Earth. And again, the top takeaway here is that this has been a extraordinary problem for the industry for some time, disposing of what they call brine, what we call in New Mexico produced water. It's the same thing. The final exhibit I'll mention right now is, I believe it was Exhibit 2. It's a 1982 document of the American Petroleum Institute. If we look at the top, the title, An Analysis of the Impact of the Regulation of Radionuclides as a Hazardous Air Pollutant on the Petroleum Industry. The American Petroleum Institute, I think many in this room would be aware, it is the major lobby for this industry, and provides some very, very important technical documents and information on best practices across the industry. This is not necessarily a public document. This is what has come out in lawsuits that have taken place in the state of Louisiana. But what the American Petroleum Institute is doing here, and I'll just note who prepared it.
prepared for the Committee for Environmental Biology and Community Health, Department of Medicine and Biology of the American Petroleum Institute. So they're looking after health.
Excuse me, but I need to make something known for the record. This is in Justin Noble's testimony, New Energy Economy, Exhibit 2, and it's his exhibit in that direct technical testimony. So that's what it is, Exhibit 2.
Yeah, and what the American Petroleum Institute is doing here is walking through their practices as an organization that looks after the oil and gas industry, that has as members various companies operating within the oil and gas industry, and they're talking about where risks are when it comes to radioactivity. They're talking about produced water. They're also talking about emissions. Astonishingly, this is something that has not necessarily come up, as I've heard in these hearings, but produced water, and we'll get into the different radioactive elements, produced water has radium. The direct daughter product of radium is radon. And so anywhere you have produced water, you inherently have radioactive emissions, which is a concern. Now, the industry was successful. Radioactivity was not regulated as a hazardous air pollutant. And if it had been, we would see a very, very different oil and gas industry because these emissions exist across the industry. I want to highlight one other very important statement in this document because it directly concerns what the state is proposing, and that regards treating produced water, treating any oil field waste streams which inherently have radioactivity. And I'm just going to read directly from the document. Any control methodology proposed for radioactive materials must recognize the fact that radioactivity cannot be modified or made inert by chemical means. It also must recognize that radioactivity dissipates at fixed rates through fixed sequences or series. Decay to daughter products cannot be guaranteed to reduce the hazard. Essentially, what they're saying here is you cannot make the radioactivity disappear. Even if you are successful in removing it from the industry's waste streams, you actually have created a new problem because you've now inherently concentrated it, and you now have to worry about the disposal of that. We'll get back to some of the exhibits later, but I talk a lot on this issue. I talk to schools, I talk to science students, journalist students, and health bodies. And I think it's important to visualize a wellhead. I think anyone on this community can do that. New Mexico has quite a lot of oil and gas development. We're familiar with the fuels that come to the surface. Natural gas, still a fuel that runs, it cooks food for people across the country, the little blue flame. Oil, refined, it can become a variety of products, including gasoline, still runs a large part of the transportation sector. I think now a lot of people might look at a wellhead and think of climate change, and maybe they'll think of carbon dioxide or methane emissions. There's a lot more happening, though, at the wellhead. The industry brings an extraordinary amount of waste to the surface. And when I say waste, I'm largely speaking about natural materials from deep within the earth. They just happen to have some very concerning contaminants, including radioactive contaminants. And the industry's processes, they're concentrated there in the formation, and some of the industry's processes can concentrate them even further. This, I would argue, has been the industry's problem since day one. People were not early on worried about climate, but they always have had the issue of what to do with their waste. In the early days, and I'm going to focus on produced water because that is the waste stream relevant to this rule. So produced water, brine, the industry has a number of different words for this waste stream. They often refer to it out west as salt water, and in many states, they refer to it as water. And I think it's important to mention, while I have access to science, I can, as a journalist, you have this magic card. I can call up scientists and talk to them. I have sources who are regulators and former regulators. I have sources in communities and people in the public health field, but a number of sources who are workers, current and past workers, and they help tell me, excuse me, a lot of the different slang the industry uses. So water, I would say, is a slang here. In many parts of the oil field, they will call produced water, water. Now, this is hugely deceptive. The word produced water is deceptive, and the word brine is deceptive. Produced water can contain toxic levels of salt. If we're just looking at the salt alone, salt levels in produced water can be 10 times saltier than the ocean, and the salt alone can be problematic. Also, elevated levels of heavy metals like lead and arsenic, a number of other heavy metals, and elevated levels of radium, which is a radioactive heavy metal. In the early days of the industry, produced water was discharged into unlined pits, into streams, into creeks, into marshes, into fields. The produced water was not what the industry wanted. They wanted the oil or the gas. And so this was something that the industry got rid of in the quickest and cheapest way possible, and that often meant discharge. Now, there is still land across the United States contaminated from the early practices of the industry. I work with a group in North Dakota called the Salted Lands Council, and they look after the hundreds of thousands of acres of farmland that has been contaminated in North Dakota by inappropriate produced water discharges. This is well before the modern age of fracking. This goes back decades. And I always say this is biblical. If you salt someone's land, you destroy its ability to produce crops. This is actually the worst thing you can do to someone's land. My father, who's a history buff, reminded me of the story of Cepius in the Third Punic War, who plowed salt into the fields of Carthage. Worse than burning the city down was actually making their land productive. And this is what happens when produced water is spilled or discharged freely onto land. And it's a major problem across the country. Now, that is not the practice that happens today. The industry has developed new ways of disposing of produced water today, and this data is coming from the Groundwater Protection Council, which serves as a fabulous source of information on produced water. Today, 96% of the produced water brought to the surface by the oil and gas industry is disposed down injection wells. I first need to highlight the amount, because 96% doesn't convey the amount. Every day across the US, 3 billion gallons of produced water is brought to the surface. That's 1 trillion gallons a year. We're talking about the whole US, 1 trillion gallons a year. New Mexico, by the way, according to the Groundwater Protection Council, it's about 67 billion gallons a year. And their data is looking at New Mexico's regulatory agency's data. But 1 trillion gallons a year across the United States. If you took that 1 trillion gallons and put it into your standard oil barrel, which is about waist high, and stack those barrels atop one another, you would reach the moon and back almost 28 times. This is an extraordinary waste stream. And again, it is a waste stream. It is not what the industry wants. It is a waste, and they need to find a way to get rid of it. So going back to injection wells, I have spent significant time in southeastern New Mexico, where groundwater is a huge concern. I spend time in the community of Jal with the mayor, with the city manager, and with a number of other officials in southeastern New Mexico. Groundwater is a concern, and injection wells are a concern. What I find very interesting in oil and gas country, whether it's Ohio, North Dakota, or New Mexico, is even in communities that we could say are pro-oil and gas. People can call them conservative communities. They really believe in this industry. They provide a lot of work for it, and they enjoy the benefits and the jobs, but they are very critical of injection wells. And I think it's appropriate for them to be critical of injection wells. This was actually one of the first topics that I began to study as I investigated this part of the oil and gas industry. And I think investigated is actually even the wrong word. I was led to injection wells because people in communities were telling me, hey, this is a problem. We have these places in our communities where endless trucks, line after line of trucks come and inject waste deep into the earth, and we don't think it's staying there. I often talk in groups where there's young people, and I say you could talk to a group of kindergartners and explain to them the concept of injection wells, and I challenge them to agree that this is a process that makes intuitive sense. Now, we're not going to trust the word of the kindergartners, but I've run this through in many situations where we have young people in the room. They're critical. They're immediately critical of this idea that you can take endless truckloads of fracking wastewater and inject it deep into the earth, which is porous, and expect it to stay there. One of the advantages of being able to spend 7 years on a topic is I can do a lot of digging. And eventually it emerged that injection wells are meritless. There is no science. There is no science. I know they are relied on across the country, but there is no science behind the idea that you can safely inject this waste. And this is relevant, by the way, for one, because this is a commission that cares about water, but for two, we get to produce water treatment because of the problems with injection wells. I just want to read you some early quotes, and this is from my book, which is also in the exhibit. Yeah, I'm going to talk slower. So right now, the EPA formally regulates the underground injection control program, which would lead us to believe that it is a sound process. Here, and I'm just going to read right from the book. In October 1970, David Dominic, commissioner of the Federal Water Quality Administration, which in 2 months would become part of the brand new EPA, warned that injection was a short-term fix to be used with caution and, quote, only until better methods of disposal are developed. When EPA laid out its proposed policy on injection wells in 1974, the agency echoed Dominic's concern, stating in an internal statement on the subject that EPA's, quote, policy considers waste disposal by deep well injection to be a temporary means of disposal. The statement continues, should a more environmentally acceptable means of disposal become available, change to such technology would be required. This to me is stunning. This is the early EPA saying they do not believe that this practice is sound. They do not think that we should rely on it as a means of disposal. If we had more time, I'd ask people, take a guess at how many oil-filled wastewater injection wells there are in the US. You can form it in your mind. There's about 181,000. That's 11 for every Starbucks. And now think of those quotes. They didn't think this was an appropriate practice, but it goes further. There was an early EPA official and a scientist who put out a very fascinating paper. It's called EPA, the Environmental Watchman. It's on deep well injection. And I'm just going to read now their words. Their name is Stanley Greenfield, and we're in the chapter of my book on injection wells. Deep well injection, says Greenfield, is a technology of avoiding problems, not solving them.
Hold on, Mr. Noble. There are a couple of women who are trying very hard to catch every one of your words.
Sorry.
One to make a transcript of every one of your words, and the other one to interpret it into Spanish in real time.
Oh, well, that is really exciting.
Please.
So I'm going to slow down, and
Please.
I apologize that you have to keep reminding me. To me, this is so slow, but I'm going to go even slower. Deep well injection, says Greenfield, Assistant Administrator for Research and Monitoring at the newly formed EPA, is a technology of avoiding problems, not solving them in any real sense. We really do not know what happens to the waste down there. We just hope. Again, doing the practice of journalism, following that talk led me to a book, and I have it here, Underground Waste Management and Environmental Implications. There was a conference in 1971 between the U.S. Geological Survey. This is our government agency that knows the best about the underground environment, and the Association of Petroleum Geologists. It was held in Houston, Texas. And again, I'll read the title, Underground Waste Management and Environmental Implications. This was a conference on injection wells. Speakers from across the industry, from across the government, attorneys, all weighed in on this idea. I highly suggest that everyone in this room obtain a copy. You can still find them on Amazon, because what these people have to say is stunning. I'm not going to bore you with reading the whole book, but as a science journalist, you learn to find your way to the scientist who has really a clear-headed path through the science. People who know science very well can describe its processes in very easy to understand terms. There's a couple of people who do that in this book. One is John Ferris, a U.S. Geological Survey research hydrologist. And I'm just going to read John Ferris's description of what is happening at an injection well, and then we're going to go to a new topic. Ferris says, the term impermeable is never an absolute. All rocks are permeable to some degree. And here now my interpretation. So the idea that any rock layer could act as a cork to seal off waste is simply wrong. Waste will always and inevitably escape the injection zone, says Ferris, and, quote, engulf everything in its inexorable migration toward the discharge boundaries of the flow system, meaning a water well, a spring, an old oil or gas well, a basement drain, even the roots of plants, or a seep on the side of the road. Ferris lays out a very interesting principle. And again, I think this is very critical for a state that cares so much about their underground water and uses it in a number of different ways. Ferris describes how initially people living within the realm of the injection well, within the space of it, may find that they have increased water pressure, right? They might think, oh, well, all of a sudden this is great. My well is running even stronger. A seep on the side of the road or a little spring is running stronger. But what's happening, as Ferris explains, is the advancing front of waste is pushing the water in the layer, in the formation out. So it creates this kind of bubble of water that's being pushed out by the advancing front of waste. And as Ferris describes, eventually, though, the sinister laggard, and those are his words, the waste cylinder arrives. Now, where we have seen already documented by the Ohio Department of Natural Resources in Ohio, where we have seen contamination is where one might expect. Where are places where we have conduits from the subterranean environment up to the ground? And an oil and gas well is one of those places. So in at least 3 different instances now in Ohio, and again, the Ohio Department of Natural Resources has investigated, they have reports out, and they have shut these injection wells down. In at least 3 different instances, we have fracking waste leaking out and coming back to the surface in conventional gas wells. And not just coming back, often spouting back at the surface and then running out and contaminating surface water. It provides me an interesting group of sources because these conventional gas men I am in touch with, and they are livid that their resource has been ruined by fracking waste leaking out. And again, it has been documented from injection wells. This is so important because again, we have 28 lines of barrels to the moon and back of waste each year, and the industry relies on this, on the process I'm describing, as their primary means of disposal. As I said earlier, even in conservative areas, even in oil and gas areas, people are critical of injection wells, and we now have documentation that they are leaking in a number of different oil fields. So, and there's cases from Oklahoma as well. I've spoken to farmers there. I won't go through the details, but I think the important takeaway is that the industry is proposing new ways to deal with their wastewater, and produced water treatment is one of those ways. Unfortunately, it contains a number of problems and has not been done in a way that shows that the industry actually understands this waste stream. I want to go back to the constituents in produced water. High levels of salts. The salts make it a very difficult waste stream to work with, meaning treat. Elevated levels of heavy metals, and you all probably have heard this information by now, what we call BTEX, volatile organics, benzene, toluene, xylene, and elevated levels of radium, this very interesting radioactive metal. Now, we live on a radioactive planet. Many of us may not think of it that way, but it is. And there's various radioactive elements peppered about the soil and rocks of Earth. Radium is moderately soluble. So there is thorium, there is uranium, there are other radioactive elements of concern in the formation water. But radium is soluble, which means it can float to the surface in a way that some of these other radioactive elements cannot. Let's talk about the levels. We know a good bit about levels of radium in produced water, and we know what radium does to human beings because of a really interesting and disturbing industrial contamination case that occurred in the early 20th century, and that's the case of the Radium Girls. I won't go through the whole story of the Radium Girls, but essentially, radioactivity had recently really been analyzed and discovered, and industry was very excited about doing tricks with it. One of the tricks was you could put radium in this paint. The radium excited zinc molecules and caused the paint to glow. So how cool. You could paint something like a watch or clock. You could paint the hands or dials, and suddenly you have a glowing watch or a glowing clock. And who wouldn't want that? It's really, it's nifty. That job of doing the painting often fell to women. We now call these women the radium girls, and they'd have these fine little brushes, and they dip the brush into the paint, and then paint the hand or dial of the watch or clock, and dip the brush into the paint and paint the hand or dial. And I know I'm in a state that's big on the arts, so if you've ever used fine brushes, done fine painting, you know the tip can get dry. They put the tip into their mouth to keep it firm, and over time accidentally ingested significant amounts of radium. Radium is a bone seeker. This is not my word, this is the medical community's word. And that means if radium gets into your body, some of it will end up in the bone. Radium is in the same column of the periodic table as calcium. That just means the edge of the radium atom looks a good bit like the edge of the calcium atom, and chemically speaking, they behave in a similar way. Calcium goes to the bone, and some of the radium will go to the bone. It's a terrible place for a radioactive element to be. These women developed horrendous cancers, and you can look up photos of what that looks like. Their faces literally fell apart, and other bone cancers, and they died in very painful ways. We know about them because of a medical examiner in Newark, New Jersey, located near one of these radium dial painting factories, who chose to follow the path of science. His name was Dr. Harrison Martland, and he actually analyzed the women. When you become contaminated like that, you literally become a piece of scientific evidence. He was able to look at their bones and determine that they indeed were wildly radioactive. Even after death, thousands of years into the future, their bones would be emitting radiation. Something else interesting happens with radium. Again, radium being a radioactive element, it does what radioactive elements do, which is blast off a little piece of itself. That's what we call radiation. Having lost a piece of itself, it literally becomes another element. Radium-226, a really important radionuclide or form of radium to the oil and gas industry. It shoots off an alpha particle, it shoots off radiation, and it becomes radon-222. Radon is a gas, and it moves through the environment in a very different way. And what would happen, you have radium in the bones for these women, decaying to radon. Gas wants to escape a system, and so these women would be literally venting radioactivity. They became like human radioactive chimneys, and Dr. Martland was able to do something called an exhalation test and measured the charged air that was escaping through their exhaled breaths. Now, this is important for the oil and gas industry because I think some of the patterns that emerged in this case are relevant. The radium industry fought back vigorously that radium could have caused these cancers, but Dr. Martland, by following the pathways of science, showed that it was absolutely what caused their cancers. Dr. Martland also gave a warning for industries of the future using radioactive elements or that involve concentrations of radioactive elements. So we know about radium, and the EPA has limits. EPA safe drinking water limit for radium is 5 picocuries per liter. That means EPA wants no more than 5 picocuries per liter of radium in drinking water, and that limit involves or combines 2 of the most common isotopes or forms of radium, radium-226 and radium-228. So EPA's limit for drinking water, 5. At 60 picocuries per liter, EPA actually defines a liquid waste stream as radioactive. This is very important. What is, quote, radioactive waste? It changes for each element. For radium, that level is 60 picocuries per liter. That means anything above 60 picocuries per liter, we can legitimately define by EPA's own definitions as radioactive waste. That limit, by the way, is repeated across government agencies. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission has a discharge limit for facilities that they oversee, such as nuclear power plants. For radium, that limit is also 60 picocuries per liter. That means that a nuclear power plant, which has a variety of different liquid discharges, they cannot have radium higher than 60 in those discharges going into the environment. We also have another important time when radium was analyzed was back in the late 1970s when EPA was deciding a law called the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, which dealt with solid waste. But the important point here is that law looked at hazardousness, and EPA considered radioactivity as a characteristic of hazardousness. In the end, they did not use it, but in their considering of radioactivity, they came up with a limit, and that limit is 50 picocuries per liter for radium. Brine in the Marcellus Formation, and I'll start there, in Pennsylvania, as determined by the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, their own report put out in 2016, radium levels in that produced water or brine can average 9,330 picocuries per liter and be as high as 28,500. So again, we have 5, the drinking water limit, 60, we can call it radioactive, and the average in the Marcellus is 9,330. One of the anecdotes that led me deeper into this topic was when I learned from an Ohio resident that a company was taking conventional produced water, so again, not fracking, from conventional wells, and making a de-icer out of it, and that de-icer was being sold on the shelves of Lowe's, and radium levels in that de-icer, and I'm just going to draw up the actual number because this one I don't have memorized. So it was being sold at a store called Hartville Hardware. That's a local store. And the radium levels were 2,491 picocuries per liter. It was also being sold at Lowe's, and the radium levels were 1,663 picocuries per liter. And we know those levels because the Ohio Department of Natural Resources sent in inspectors and tested these products. And that was great due diligence on their part. Coming back to the Permian and New Mexico and some of the oil and gas formations here, we have precious little data on radium levels. And again, to me, this is stunning and it's concerning. We can go back to the 1982 American Petroleum Institute paper I presented, which warns that radioactivity, and when we say radioactivity, we mean radioactive elements such as radium, are going to be of primary concern to anyone working with oil-filled wastewater, and yet we don't even have data. Now, the data we do have, we don't even have comprehensive data. The data we do have indicates that in the Permian, radium levels are often above 400 to 500 picocuries per liter and be over 1,000 picocuries per liter. And that was a paper that I believe was in my original testimony and done by some of the institutions, very reputable institutions in New Mexico. My first challenge before we even get to if these facilities can actually succeed is we need to know the levels of the most concerning contaminant in this waste stream that these companies are claiming they're going to be able to treat. And we do not have that right now. I don't think there's anyone who can say we do have comprehensive data. And if we do, show me. I haven't seen it, and I've spent quite a lot of time looking for it. But the data we have shows that radium levels in New Mexico in the produced water are well above the safe drinking water limit and well above the limit that we can define a liquid waste stream as radioactive. So when you see a brine truck going by, it will not have a radioactivity placard. It will not have a hazmat placard, but it is, according to the definitions laid out by the Environmental Protection Agency, it is radioactive waste. Now that I can tell you that from the number side, as I just have, where that really hits home is when you talk to the workers who are in intimate contact with this material. I think that concludes the first portion of my testimony. And for the second portion, I really want to get right to the heart of the matter, which is produced water treatment. And I believe we have set up a video, a YouTube video. And if we can play that, that would be fantastic. Thank you so much. And it's a long video. I think we just need to go to like minute 204 or something like that. I appreciate it. And what you're watching here is a company in the Marcellus Utica area that has claimed that they can treat produced water. They're very excited about it.
As earthquakes continue to rattle Oklahoma, the search goes on for a solution to the deep water injection wells blamed for the state's seismic surge. A forum at the state capitol this week offered a glimpse of some technology that could help, although experts caution against expecting a magic bullet to end Oklahoma earthquakes.
The number of earthquakes in Oklahoma has dropped in recent months, in part because of reduced oil production due to slumping oil prices and restrictions on the volumes of wastewater dumped into injection wells in earthquake-prone areas. Brian Colt believes he can eliminate the need for injection wells entirely by treating the water, allowing it to be used for other purposes.
There are 650,000 barrels of wastewater that are deep well injected on a daily basis in the state of Oklahoma. We could put 10 facilities up and completely eliminate the need for deep well injection.
Colt is president of Fairmont Brine Processing, which operates a plant in West Virginia that processes about 10,000 barrels of wastewater from oil and gas activity. During a public forum at the state capitol, Colt described the process, which uses evaporation followed by crystallization to remove salts that are dissolved in the water.
From that, we produce distilled water. That distilled water can be is reused during the drilling and hydraulic fracturing process. It can be reused for agricultural purposes, or it could be discharged into a body of water.
The process also results in sodium chloride, or salt, which Colt says can be used in swimming pools or as a de-icer for Oklahoma roads in winter. J.D. Strong is executive director of the Oklahoma Water Resources Board. He also chairs a produced water working group, which has been studying the issue of recycling water from oil and gas activity.
We've known for decades technologies exist to treat the worst imaginable water and turn it into perfectly pure water. It's really the cost.
And we can stop at this point. Thank you.
Just wait.
Thanks so much for setting that up.
Okay, wait a second. So I just want you to know that this is exhibit number 19 for the record. It's in your Dropbox. And of course, it's available for you. So just for the record, that YouTube video is exhibit 19, New Energy Economy 19.
Thank you. A couple quick points I'll make on that video. One is you see, as I have been saying, that there is a reaction to injection wells. Produced water treatment is being advertised as a way to solve that problem. And I understand that. I certainly understand the problem with injection wells, and I understand the industry's desire to move beyond them to a more appropriate way of disposing of oil-filled wastewater. The other thing that I think is important is you have an individual from West Virginia going to the Oklahoma State Capitol and touting their product and their processes, talking about how great this technology they have is for treating produced water. Hold that in your mind. I now want to go to what I believe is Exhibit 11, which is an EPA report on that site. And you saw a photo of the site. It was the aerial view.
For the record, I would like to say that this is included in New Energy Economy Exhibit 5, the rebuttal testimony of Justin Noble, and Exhibits 10 through 13. Madam Hearing Officer, may I approach?
Yeah, this exhibit was so important that we took the effort to photocopy it, and I have highlighted certain key sections. And at the top, you see highlighted, okay, Fairmont Brine.
No, just wait a second. For the record, this is, again, part of Mr. Noble's rebuttal testimony. It's included in the Dropbox as exhibit number 5. And in his testimony, it's exhibit 11. However, the one that we have tendered to you is highlighted, which Mr. Noble will talk about. And the one that's in the record is not highlighted. It's the original.
Thank you. So what you're looking at is a document in which the EPA is assessing the same facility you just heard that was discussed in glowing terms. They're assessing it for potential Superfund status. Again, the pathway of science is so important, and I can take it right from the industry, from that American Petroleum Institute report. I know that any facility trying to treat produced water is potentially a problematic facility, because what are they going to do with all of the radioactivity that they pull out of this waste stream, even if they are successful? Well, in this case, we have the answer. It is sitting there in vats and tanks and splattered and spread around the site. And EPA, this report, sent officials there to document it. I think it's important to mention, because an allegation was made in the New Mexico Oil and Gas Association's testimony in the rebuttal to my testimony, that I illegally entered this site. As you will soon see, this site became a party spot for people in West Virginia. I went there with a former Department of Energy scientist who has a Geiger counter and significant radiation experience, and a local Ohio organizer, and we found that the site was deeply contaminated with radioactivity. When I published an article about it, suddenly the EPA got their act together and started to take the site seriously. The site is now fenced off, which is appropriate, but it was being freely accessed by the community. I'm just going to read some of the highlights.
Can you tell the commission where you are when you read it, and go slowly?
Yes, so I'm going to turn to the second page, and there's yellow highlighting and reddish highlighting, and I'm reading from the first passage of reddish highlighting. EPA, OSC, accompanied by representatives from WVDEP, that's West Virginia Department of Health, West Virginia Department of Environmental Protection, and WVDHHR, that's West Virginia Department of Health and Human Resources, I believe, performed a removal assessment at the site. At the time, even higher radiation readings, up to 3.03 milliroentgens per hour, were observed around the explosion site. The site had exploded. As a reference, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission recommends a dose limit of not greater than 2 milliroentgens in any 1 hour from external radiation sources in any unrestricted area, and less than 100 milliroentgens per calendar year from both external and internal sources of radiation in unrestricted and controlled areas.
Well, Mr. Noble, you speed up when you read.
Yeah, I've been asked to spell milliroentgens. Do you see the abbreviation for the radioactive unit? M with a capital R/HR. That would be milli, like the metric system, MILLI. Roentgens is ROENTGEN, and the slash just means per hour. What EPA is conveying here essentially is these levels are high. They're concerningly high, and this is not a controlled space. I'm now moving down a couple paragraphs to the to the second starred red highlighted paragraph. Human exposure to radionuclides by inhalation, absorption, or ingestion is possible. Radionuclides can cause acute or chronic effects depending on dose. Rampant vandalism has occurred on the site, and trash deposited there indicates trespassers may be partying at the site for unknown periods of time. Increased time spent near radionuclides increases dose and potential health effects. I cannot highlight enough how important that paragraph is. You saw the company there. They were very excited about their processes and their product. Now you see what happened when they tried to carry it out in the real world. Not only did they fail, which is fine, many businesses fail, but many businesses fail without contaminating the community and the space that the community interacts with. This project failed and contaminated the local environment and enabled people from the community, kids namely, to have access to their failed system of treating produced water. I think for a group that cares about water and water quality, some of the following paragraphs are very important as well, because we don't just have this concern of exposure, we also have waste leaking off the site. EPA discusses that. I'm going now to the paragraph directly below, also highlighted in red, also with a star. The site is directly upgradient of the Monongahela River. I will remind people that the Monongahela River serves water as drinking water for many communities, including the city of Pittsburgh. The site is directly upgradient of the Monongahela River. The former FBP, that's Fairmont Brine Processing Facility, had a NIPDES permit to monitor discharge into the river. However, since the facility was abandoned, the quantities and types of hazardous substances entering the river is unknown. Radionuclides or other hazardous substances have the potential to impact the Monongahela River either by overflow or the ponds on site or through an existing outfall. So we are talking about very serious surface water contamination to a body of water that serves as a drinking water source.
Madam Hearing Officer, may I give a copy of this to the court reporter so she could follow along? I see her struggling with this. And also, Mr. Noble, could you please explain what NPD is?
Yes, NIPDES permit. Sorry. National Pollution Discharge Elimination System. Okay, I apologize for that. NIPDES is the primary permit you would have if you had a release into a river, such as this facility does. National Pollution Discharge Elimination System, I believe, is the S. Importantly, radium, this radioactive element we've been talking about, is not measured in that permit. That is a huge problem across the oil and gas industry. But again, I think an important takeaway here is it was a permitted facility. It was operating, at least in the eyes of West Virginia regulatory agencies, by the books. You could see them wanting to set up plants in other states, going right to the heart of power. And yet, this is the result. Now, I'll get in a moment to the workers, because I think that is something that has not been addressed here. Their story is very important, the workers who worked at this facility. But it is challenging. The geotechnical challenges of treating this waste stream are tremendous. They have been downplayed, they have been dismissed, but this facility conveys that even with a well-meaning operating company, they had capital, they were backed, they actually had relationships with some of the universities in Pennsylvania, and they failed miserably. And failed in a very serious and concerning way, in a way that put the health of the community at risk and put the health of their own workers at risk. So I spoke to many of the workers who used to work at this facility. After I published my article, and we can go to that, I believe that is Exhibit 25, and it's an article that was published in an outlet called TruthDig. I don't know if it's necessary to pull it up, and I don't like to. I know it's not necessarily appropriate form to rely on one's own work, but here I'm relying on my work because my work has passages from the workers who worked at their plant, and I think their perspective is very important. So I'm just drawing up that document here. Okay. Published December 7th, 2023 in Truth Dig, a slow rolling disaster in fracking country. Yes, the article was published December 7th, 2023 with an investigative site called Truth Dig, and the title is A Slow Rolling Disaster in Fracking Country. And the subtitle conveys the reason why I'm mentioning this. Ex-employees at, quote, West Virginia's Chernobyl speak out on lethal cancers, regulatory failure, and contaminated drinking water. Two of the coworkers from that facility have since died of cancer, one of stomach cancer, one of brain cancer. I am well aware of the difficulties in linking cancers or even clusters of cancers to any one cause, but I think it's certainly, when you're talking to workers at a facility like this, important to tabulate them and pay attention when they start discussing health risks. The problem from the workers' perspective at this facility is they had an impossible task. Again, they had plans to treat produced water, but carried out in the real world, that facility could not actually do it. A variety of different systems involved in that facility failed regularly. Failing regularly meant these workers were often working in very dusty rooms. There was salt dust in the air. Remember, produced water has a lot of salt. Salt is, they're trying to remove the salt, and you heard them in the video saying, sell it as a de-icing product. They were in an environment that is filled with dust. They did not have any appropriate PPE. They did not even have respirators. They're breathing in this dust regularly. You saw right there in EPA's report the levels right outside the facility. Now, we don't know the levels in the dust they were breathing in and day out, working 12 to 16-hour shifts, but we know that radium does bond to particles. Radium is readily a part of dust, and there is other oil field literature that talks about oil field jobs that involve oil field waste in which dusty environments are created, radium levels are elevated in the dust, and that becomes a significant means of exposure. The two things that we do most as human beings are drink water and breathe air. These are regular actions, and these become the most worrisome pathways of exposure, because levels don't even have to be that high when you do something a lot. Breathing day in, day out in this dusty environment is a tremendous concern, and I am working with scientists now to try and get a better radiological picture of exactly what these workers were exposed to, and if the workers who died of cancer, if those cancers can indeed be linked to their radiation exposure. There are programs that will enable the right scientists to do that. And this is something I often do. I'm led to a place where I can't go any further, but I have some good contacts in the scientific community. I'm going to stop there for that with this example. I hope people take the time to look at it. I am aware that the signature of the Marcellus produced water that they were treating is different than the Permian signature. We know that radium levels are quite elevated in the Marcellus. Salts are elevated as well. Heavy metals are elevated. What we know of the Permian, though, does not lead us to believe we have no problem. It's just the levels are lower. And I think we need more data to determine just how much lower. When you only have one or two data points, I don't think it's even really appropriate to say definitively the levels are lower here. Let's look across the Permian. The Permian is a very complicated oil and gas formation with a lot of different sections, and let's really see what levels are in the Permian. But we know that this facility failed in a way that put water resources at risk, the workers at risk, and the community at risk. There's one more example that I would like to give when it comes to produced water treatment facilities. And we're going to start, I believe it's Exhibit 26. It's a local news article from a West Virginia newspaper.
You want me to pull that up?
We can pull that up. Sure, that'd be great if possible.
Ms. Jones, is Exhibit 26. Yes, and it's called Clearwater Facility.
And the top of the document says West Virginia News with a little logo of the state of West Virginia.
Yeah, appreciate it.
It might be good to take a break and while Pam is pulling this up, uh, we definitely need a break. The rest of us have been sitting for a very long time. And my memory is that each of the technical witnesses had an hour, and Mr. Noble is definitely approaching his hour. So let's break until 11. When we come back, we'll take the last several minutes of Mr. Noble's testimony and then go to questioning. Thank you.
Mexico stuff. I would ask a question. I can work that in.
Let's come back from the break, please. When we took a break, Ms. Nancy was having exhibit NEE 26, I believe, pulled up so that we could all see it. It's there on the screen. If you would, Ms. Nancy.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer, and we would like to continue with the presentation of Mr. Noble. Yes, this is in fact New Energy Economy 26 that is on the screen. Mr. Noble?
Thank you. This exhibit is a local West Virginia news article about another produced water treatment facility. It was called Clearwater. And just if you could scroll down just a little bit so we can see that first highlighted paragraph. Perfect. The $300 million facility, which cleans fracking water so it can safely be reused, is an entirely unique venture in the oil and gas industry. Again, the industry was very proud of this facility. $300 million is a significant investment. The facility aimed to take produced water, oil-filled wastewater, from wells operated by Antero, which is a Colorado-based oil and gas extraction company. And the treatment facility was designed and run by a company called Veolia. Veolia is a multinational corporation with headquarters in Paris, France, where the Olympics are. And they have it's a multi-billion-dollar company. Veolia has projects all over the world.
Could you spell Veolia?
Veolia. And the date on this article is April 13th, 2019. I'm just going to scroll down to where the pink highlighting or magenta highlighting is and read one more line from the news article. That's perfect. They're describing what's happening here. We frack or complete the well, and some of the water flows back from that effort, and it's something typically taken to a wastewater well or injection well. We just don't see those as being viable long-term, and that's why we've arrived at Clearwater as an alternate solution to injection wells. Again, highlighting the argument or trend that I've been describing in my testimony of how the industry is trying to pull away from injection wells. You see it right there in that statement. And then scroll down just a little bit further. There's one more magenta highlighted passage. Perfect, thank you. Kevin Ellis, Vice President of Government Relations with Antero, said Clearwater is one of the more prominent and important environmental projects undertaken in the United States in a long time in the oil and gas industry. Quote, "That's why we're so proud of this project. It's the best project like this in the world, bar none, period." Again, the takeaway, the message I'm trying to convey is that the industry was very excited about this project, and there is a legitimate need for this project. Injection wells are problematic, and they are trying to bring the industry away from that. We now can move on to the next exhibit, which I believe is Exhibit 20, and it is the complaint in a lawsuit in which Antero, the oil and gas operator, is suing Veolia, alleging that the project was a failure. Yeah, we can pull that up to the screen as well. As you can see at the top, this is filed in the District Court of Denver County, Colorado. That's where Antero does business. And the date on the document is February 2nd, 2023. And if we scroll down just a little bit, we'll come to a series of highlighted passages. Perfect, thank you. So I think people are probably familiar with the nature of a complaint. Essentially, one company is suing the other company saying your project did not work. In this case, it's Antero alleging suing Veolia and alleging, and you see it highlighted in red, Clearwater was a failure. I appreciate the time constraints, so I won't go through this entire complaint, but it lays out a number of problems with this facility. What I am trying to convey by presenting this document is that here we have some very sophisticated players. We have a facility that cost over $250 million. Again, Veolia, operating all over the world. It's regarded as a very sophisticated and fancy company. Antero is a very prominent player across a number of U.S. oil and gas plays. When this plant was shuttered, Antero conveyed to the local news that it was because of a drop in gas prices. I am in touch with many workers who hauled wastewater, and they told me that was not accurate. Now we have it from the companies themselves that indeed was not accurate. And the complaint goes through the details of why the facility did not work. Again, the takeaway, it is a very complex waste stream. And even when you hurl hundreds of millions of dollars at it and have very sophisticated companies at the wheel, it doesn't always work. Now, I have not been able to access this site because unlike the previous site, which was completely, had no trespassing signs and had open pathways for the community to enter, this facility is guarded by very tall fences. I'm not about to climb them. So I don't know what it looks like on site, but from reading the complaint, I have serious concerns that the waters of West Virginia are being impacted by this facility, which, like the previous one, was not successful in treating produced water. The next part of my testimony concerns New Mexico issues. I have taken the time to go through all of the RFIs that address produced water. There are 34 companies, as I counted, proposing to treat produced water.
Could you just say for the record what RFI is?
That is a request for information. And this is the document in which companies are trying to convey their project, how they're going to treat produced water, some of the economic measures, and talk through the technical challenges of how they will be able to successfully do produced water treatment.
Mr. Noble, you're talking about in New Mexico, correct?
Yes, correct. So I'm now transitioning to looking at what has been proposed under this rule. There was a request made for information, the RFI, and looking through those documents provides me a chance to analyze the level of knowledge that companies have presented back to the state agencies on some of the issues that I've been discussing here in my testimony.
Madam Administrator, would you please bring up Exhibit 21?
Ms. Nanasi, would you estimate the rest of this?
Good. We're ending this part right now. Thank you.
I forgot to mention that important point. This would be the final thing. Thank you all so much. It's, yeah. That's the correct document. Thank you. So these facilities are not operational. I cannot go and look at them. No one can. They're proposals, but on the New Mexico Environment Department's website, there is a link in which any member of the public can upload and examine the RFIs, which again are a way of these companies describing how they're going to handle the various challenges of treating produced water. I set up a little rubric to try and determine their knowledge on what I think is one of the most concerning elements of produced water, which is its radiological signature. We can just scroll on through to the bottom. So I was looking to see if their proposals even mention words like radium, radioactivity, norm, which is an industry word for describing oil field radioactivity. It stands for naturally occurring radioactive materials. And in the right-hand column, I was making notes on how these companies described the impediments and challenges. Of course, there are many. There's economic challenges, there's data challenges, but to me, this is a very important challenge. And did these companies discuss this particular challenge? And at the way bottom of the document, I tabulated what I learned from looking through all of the companies that aim to treat produced waters, RFIs.
In New Mexico.
In New Mexico, completely germane to the rule I am testifying on. Of 34 companies that submitted RFIs to treat produced water with the New Mexico Environment Department, only 7 mention radioactivity. Only 7. Only 2 companies of 34 present radioactivity as a serious concern. 7 mention it, but some of them are dismissive of the challenges. Only 2 companies of 34 present radioactivity as a serious concern, and only 1 of 34 companies that submitted RFIs to treat produced water speak authoritatively on radioactivity concerns, and that was Trevi Systems, which it's excellent document and shows a very thorough understanding of some of the challenges, but that was the only one. I'm not trying to make these people look unprepared, but I think it's pretty important, given the knowledge I built, to look at what knowledge they have on this part of the process. And as a whole, it's not very much, or at least they don't seem to think it's concerning or a big challenge. That to me is very worrisome. And I will stop there and happy to answer questions that anyone might have. Thank you all once again.
Did you want?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Noble.
Yeah, I want to be.
There's
cognizant
one
of
other
time.
thing, Madam Hearing Officer, and Mr. Noble would like to address now, in addition to what he's already told you, particularly Mr. Jacoby's rebuttal testimony and rebuttal. If you could have a couple more minutes just on that topic.
I think I'm going to let the folks ask questions. I took that rebuttal very seriously because it has a lot of accusations, and I just want to let you all know that I have gone through and conveyed that those accusations are baseless and that the facts presented are not accurate, and I do have responses to them, but I'm not going to go through it. But I do have that document, and if that's something people want to talk about, I'm happy to answer questions on that too. But I think best to open it up to questions. Thank you.
Okay, so before we move on, I would like to move into evidence. The direct technical testimony of Justin Noble, that's exhibit number 2. The rebuttal testimony of Justin Noble, that's number 5. Then I would like to move into evidence. New Energy Economy, exhibit 19, 20, 21, 22, 24, 25, 26.
Okay, objections?
Hearing officer.
It's not on.
Now can you hear me?
Thank you very much.
NMOGA objects to admission of exhibits 14 through 29. Those exhibits were uploaded at some point last night, I believe. And the pre-hearing order's clear that all technical testimony exhibits must be attached to the notice of intent. That's at paragraph 3, subsection 5 of the pre-hearing order. Also, the rule provides similarly 20.1.6.20, 202A6 provides the same, that all exhibits accompanying technical testimony should be attached to the notice of intent.
Thank you,
Your
Ms.
Honor.
Shaheen. Oh, sorry, Mr. Max.
Yes.
I concur in Namoga's objection as well as I offer.
Okay, hold on, Mr. Maxwell. All right, this is Ms. Shaheen. She represents Namoga. Thank you, Ms. Shaheen. Okay, now Mr. Maxwell.
Yes, I concur in Namoga's objection to these exhibits. I also offer that these exhibits were submitted to the Dropbox at approximately 2 to 3 o'clock in the morning last night, and that these exhibits should have been, with the exception of 23, which is too large, emailed directly to the parties in accordance with the rules of this proceeding, where exhibits should be provided to parties. Finally, the opportunity to offer rebuttal has greatly muddied the ability of parties to identify which of these exhibits they're offering today without any notification are indeed associated with rebuttal or direct or rebuttal testimony. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other council or parties wish to weigh in? Ms. Taylor?
But it might be turned off.
Good morning, Madam Hearing Officer and Commissioners. Yes, Select Water Solutions also joins the objection for the reasons already stated. And he mentioned that they are not rebuttal, so I don't think they can come in under that either.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? All right. Ms. Nanasti, would you like to address the objections?
I'm not sure, first of all, which exhibits were objected to, if it's 14 through 29, because I think that's what was said.
14 through 29.
I haven't even moved
I
anything
understand, but
except for 19 through, and it's not 19 through 29, but it was 19, 20, 21, 22, 24, 25, 26. I believe that they're relevant to this commission. You've accepted lots of other exhibits, days or within a time frame when somebody else has testified, and so I think that the same opportunity should apply to new energy economy. And they're clearly important to this commission's understanding, so that they can look at the documents at their leisure, to what Mr. Noble's opening discussed.
okay, so the other exhibits I've accepted were uploaded in connection timely with either the direct NOI or the rebuttal NOI. I don't know that I've been just sort of freely accepting everything that's uploaded hours before testimony is offered. I don't remember doing that. If I have,
Well, I'll just say that, for instance, Sierra Club's witness just testified, Mr. DeSalen. It wasn't hours, but it was days, and it was not included in the NOI. And so on that just was allowed.
and was that properly identified as rebuttal?
I don't remember if it was exclusively identified as cerebral.
Okay, that would be my guess as to what was going on there without being able to remember personally. Are there any of these exhibits that you would be able to just make a straight face argument that they are cerebral?
Well, I think that in some ways they all are, because Mr. Jacoby in particular, Nimoga's witness, states that basically Mr. Noble's position on the importance of radioactivity to this commission and to the water quality decision that's being made is baseless, and that there's no information in New Mexico for Mr. Noble to rely on. And so what he's saying is, here's a pattern here. There's a big press conference, there's a big hoopla that happens in West Virginia or Oklahoma or Pennsylvania, and then the facility fails. And so what he was, and then also about the RFI, one particular objection from Mr. Jacoby is that Mr. Noble knows nothing about New Mexico, and he admits that. So the fact that Exhibit 21, for instance, that Mr. Noble took the time and went through all the applications to the New Mexico Environment Department and looked at them and determined whether those applicants had any understanding of radioactivity norm in the produced water is important. And then only really 1 out of 34 had taken it seriously. That's the kind of information that is critical for this body to determine if allowing produced water treatment facilities will be a threat to the health and safety of people and the environment.
Okay, so thank you for all of that. Firstly, I didn't know that these were in the Dropbox, at 2:00 this morning.
I was up.
Did not look at them before we began this morning. And so I'm going to have to take the objections under advisement, actually look at these to see if they can be fairly characterized as to rebuttal.
Thank you.
And make the ruling later. But I also want to say to you and to everyone that Mr. Maxwell's comment in an email in the last hour is very much on point, and I agree with him completely. Anyone putting anything into the Dropbox needs to make sure that every other party in council knows that it's there. And if it doesn't need to be there, that is to say it's small enough to share via email, please do that. Please do
I
that.
absolutely will. I don't think that was specifically part of your order, but I would, we will send everything out to
Okay.
every party.
Yeah, I mean, we can't be expected to sit there and monitor the Dropbox. And I've had that complaint from at least one commissioner as well. Our commissioners like to do their homework. All right, so let's move to questioning. I will start over there with Vice Chair Armstrong. Vice Chair Armstrong, do you have questions?
Excuse me for 1 second, but could you please rule on Exhibit 2 and 5, which there was no objection to?
All right, 2 and 5, that was Mr. Noble's direct and rebuttal testimony. 2 and 5 were admitted. Thank you for.
Thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Looping back there. Vice Chair Armstrong, do you have questions?
No questions, thank you.
All right, Commissioner Fry.
No questions of this name.
Commissioner McWilliams. I'm sorry, Commissioner Patton.
No questions.
Thank you. Commissioner McWilliams.
Yeah, I have a few questions.
All right.
Thank you for your testimony today. Closer. Okay. How's that? You testified that saltwater disposal wells are not safe. I think you said there was no science to back up that they were safe. I was curious if you know how the saltwater disposal well is constructed?
Yes, I'm aware that many disposal wells rely on old oil and gas wells, and there's many also that are newly created. I don't think, though, that the drilling process of the disposal well is at issue. The industry is very good at drilling holes in the ground. What's at issue is what is happening in the formation where the waste is being injected into, and that is what I believe is scientifically meritless. It is inaccurate to say that that waste is going to be contained within the formation. And you heard some, I think, very powerful testimony by other people to convey why that's so problematic. So I don't have a problem with the drilling of a well. The industry is great at drilling wells, and it's really a technological achievement to drill 5,000, 10,000 feet through the earth. The problem is the layer in which the waste is being deposited, and this claim that the waste will remain in that formation.
Okay, so the depths of these disposal wells can be up to 10,000 feet. Do you agree with that?
The formation, the injection wells that I'm familiar with can range quite a bit, but often be in the range of a mile deep.
Okay, so over 5,000 feet to 10,000 feet would be a typical saltwater disposal well depth.
And the injection wells I'm familiar with are the injection wells I'm most familiar with are in the Marcellus Utica. So while I have spent time looking at a lot of injection wells in New Mexico, I am not familiar with the specific geologic formation. But again, I think my point is that regardless of formation, there is an issue. It doesn't matter if an injection well is just below the water table, a mile below the water table, or 4 miles below the water table. The science that I have found in my research questions the ability for an injection well to contain waste in what's called the targeted formation.
In the targeted formation, there is multiple layers of geologic formations from the surface all the way to the targeted formation, correct?
Correct.
And so you're proposing that maybe the wellbore might have sufficient isolation with multiple strings of casing, but that the produced water is somehow traveling up the formations a mile or more.
That's exactly what's happening. And in one of the cases in Ohio, that's actually laid out in a report of the Ohio Department of Natural Resources. The fracking waste travels, I believe it's 4 or 5 miles horizontally, and then 1 to 2 miles vertically. So yes, the waste is moving through the earth, both horizontally, meaning spreading out, and then also up, meaning coming up to the surface.
Okay. How are they measuring that movement underground?
There's a great report that if you're curious about it, I can pass along and certainly put it into submission. The Ohio Department of Natural Resources tapped a company, I believe, based in Colorado to assess the situation and determine how the waste was moving. There are pre-existing cracks, fissures in all geologic formations. And what the waste does is it is able to travel along those fissures and cracks and actually, in some cases, enlarge them. Waste is being injected, if one remembers, at high pressure. And it is this high pressure that becomes an additional concern for the underground environment. The trick that's happening is if you inject waste at high pressure, you essentially can cram it in there. But that cramming in puts a lot of stress on the subterranean environment. Now, even in that situation, the state and the company they tap to look at the problem does not know exactly the exact pathway that waste moved underground. What they do know is that at the conventional gas well, where waste is coming up, the signature of that waste is right in line with the signature of Marcellus fracking waste. And the state of Ohio is so sure of it that they've determined that that is indeed what's coming up at these wells. So because they know it's coming up there, we know somehow it did get through the earth and to that point.
Are you familiar with microseismic technology?
To detect earthquakes? Yes.
No, microseismic used in industry would be able to measure using sound waves. They install microphones in offset wells, and they can measure the movement of fluid. They could do it even while fracking at very high pressures, which is substantially higher pressures than when you're injecting in an SWD well. But that actually is a technology that industry has used to measure where the fluid is going underground at very large distances.
So it seems that your belief seems to be that injection wells are perfectly appropriate at containing waste within the target layer of injection.
Well, I'm not the one on the witness list.
Well, I need to
I'm just,
understand.
I'm trying to, yeah, I'm trying to point out that there is technology that we can use to determine whether or not fluid movement underground is happening and to what distance. And it's used often in industry on purpose because they want to contain that frac to the formation that has hydrocarbons.
Commissioner McWilliams, are you asking him to agree with that point?
I just was wondering if he had any information regarding that. It's related.
I would be
to
interested in seeing
the migration comment about being able to go to aquifer zones.
No, I understand. Just was hoping there was a question at the end of it. That's all.
Yes.
Okay.
So I think I'm not familiar with the Ohio study that you mentioned, and I don't know if it's in record.
I can submit it, but I think what I hear is that the industry has ways in which they can determine whether waste is leaking in the underground environment, and you seem to be confident, or you're expressing that the industry is confident that they are not leaking out waste because they have these ways of measuring. I certainly would be interested. I'm not as familiar with that technology, but I think in the cases where we've established that waste is leaking, it would absolutely be interesting to look at some of that technology and see if the industry indeed knew, with their own really sophisticated monitoring and measuring, whether they had figured out it was leaking or whether that equipment wasn't able to detect that.
Okay. You mentioned that you've talked to multiple communities within New Mexico and outside of New Mexico, that these oil and gas communities, that maybe the mayors and the officials are concerned with SWDs. Can you elaborate on whether they're concerned about contamination or if they're more concerned about the induced seismic activity?
Yeah, thank you for the good question. It's a good question. The induced seismic activity is directly linked, I think, to the concern for contamination. Induced seismicity is, those are earthquakes happening in the underground environment. Earthquakes is the earth slipping and moving, and that sort of movement can be the exact type of thing that enlarges a fissure or crack and enables waste to escape a specific zone. So the conversations I'm referring to are in Jal, New Mexico, where they take great pride in the oil and gas industry. They also take great pride in the farming community. And the farming community is reliant on underground water, and they do have a concern about all the injection wells in that area and that it threatens their underground water supply. Concern meaning this is something we hold precious, and this is an activity that we worry may contaminate this thing we hold precious.
Okay. Are you testifying today that radioactivity in produced water is could vary by formation or could vary by location? And just your response on that.
Absolutely. The radium levels, the levels of salts, the levels of metals vary greatly by formation, meaning Marcellus to Bakken to Permian, and also vary greatly within the formation, which is why I think it's so critical to get more data. When you only have a couple data points, you don't know if you're looking at the middle, the lower end, or the higher end. But yes, there is great variability, and there's also variability over the life cycle of any particular well.
Okay, fair enough. The Marcellus produced water in Pennsylvania, it's my understanding that they have higher amounts of radioactivity than the Permian Basin in New Mexico. Is that true?
Based on the data we have of the Permian, that's correct.
Okay. I'm just curious if, the amount of produced water that's produced in New Mexico and across the United States. We have thousands of workers that are handling produced water every single day, and I'm not aware of special radioactivity PPE that they're using to handle it. And so I'm just curious if that is related to very small amounts, if none, of radioactivity in the produced water.
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you. It's a problem. Now, it's not necessarily a problem for the driver driving the brine truck. They're driving a truck and there's a lot of steel between them and the produced water, but produced water is filled with all these different suspended solids, elements that we've been talking about, salts, heavy metals, and radium. Just like if you have a strong coffee and you let it sit for long enough, there's going to be a little bit of a layer of sludge at the bottom. So produced water, whether it's in the wellhead in a tank or in a brine truck, will accumulate a sludge on the bottom of that tank. The concerning job is the worker who must go in and scoop and shovel out that sludge. That is a much more intimate exposure with the waste than the driver. So yeah.
So they're using manual labor to shovel out
That's correct. Yeah.
Not using equipment to help do that.
There may be some operators that use equipment, but yes, manual labor is often used. A worker will shovel that out, whether it be a brine tank, a brine truck. There's a number of tanks that accumulate sludge. Essentially, any tank holding produced water, if it's produced water that has a high sediment load, a high suspended solid load, will accumulate a sludge. And yes, the job of removing that sludge would be a concerning job, especially if the worker is not informed and protected against radioactivity.
Okay, thank you. That's all my questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Dominguez.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. I'll preface this as saying I'm one of those people that likes to review the administrative record in order to properly prepare questions to make the best use of the Commission's time. And therefore, I have no questions for this witness.
All right, thank you. Chair Thompson.
Thank you. And thank you for your testimony and the work that you've put into it, and especially for your difficulties in coming to New Mexico. I know it's been tough. So let's talk about deep well injection a little bit. I was a little bit surprised when you say there is meritless science, and then you cite references that are 50 years old. Has any work been done on subsurface disposal of different types of materials in the last 50 years?
I think there's been quite a bit of research. That's not a body of research I'm familiar with. Why I've focused on these early documents is I see them as important alarm bells for this practice. I think we can start with this induced seismicity. I mean, this is, I think it's quite stunning that we now know that a deep well injection causes earthquakes. I mean, we have enabled a process that maneuvers the underground environment. I think that alone is testament that this is an alarming process that is maneuvering the subterranean environment in ways that we don't necessarily understand. We're not trying to cause earthquakes here, and yet that has become just a common practice. And I've spoke with people in Oklahoma who are actually quite surprised that deep well disposal has been able to go forward despite this revelation that it's caused earthquakes across the country. So I think that alone is reason to take these early alarm bells seriously.
And I agree, there is induced seismicity. I also ask, isn't the subsurface geology of the Oklahoma formations much shallower than what's being done in New Mexico in the Permian?
I'm not familiar with all of the specific formations being targeted. What I do know is that when you want to inject a large body of waste underground, you're going to choose a porous formation, often a limestone or a sandstone. Now, limestones and sandstones are interestingly, and porous, by the way, means a formation that has holes, essentially spaces. Now, some formations, some geologic formations are so tightly compacted, it's very difficult to inject anything into them. But the porous formations are often also the formations that have already filled up with liquids or gases. So that would be things like water or oil and gas. And these are the formations that are often targeted.
Yeah. You know, there's a large body of literature now on use of deep well injection for carbon sequestration, carbon capture. And are you familiar with that body of literature?
I'm not familiar with that body of literature. One point I think is very critical here. It is not just produced water that is being injected. Flowback is also being injected. Flowback is a separate waste stream that comes up in the weeks and months after a well has been hydraulically fractured. And it has been documented in the scientific community that some of the chemicals used in the frac job resurface. So whereas produced water is a naturally occurring waste stream, flowback includes some human-made chemicals. And remember the goal of those chemicals. The fracking process involves creating fissures and cracks in difficult to access formations. So we have chemicals injected down, fracked, into these formations, and their job is to crack open. Often it's a shale layer, and sand can act as a prop and enable oil and gas to flow out. Some of these chemicals are coming back to the surface. That refers to flowback, and flowback is a copious waste stream as well. You're now re-injecting chemicals whose job is designed to crack rock, and you're injecting it back into the earth. I don't think that flowback mixed in with the contaminants, natural contaminants in produced water, and how that is going to interact with the subterranean environment has been appropriately studied in place. And that's partially because it's very difficult to set up a laboratory, deep underground. But I think it's important to note that that chemical makeup is included in what's being injected back into the earth as well.
Are you aware of any contamination of overlying aquifers as a result of saltwater disposal injection in the Permian Basin in New Mexico?
I am not aware. No, I am aware of instances in West Texas where certainly there's cause for alarm and an appropriate questioning of whether waste coming up at the surface may be leaking from disposal wells.
Well, so we've got hundreds of saltwater disposal wells in this state, and little or no, to your knowledge, little or no evidence of contamination from these injection wells. Is that a fair statement?
I don't think there's little to no evidence. The earth, there's data all around us, and it's whether or not we choose to actually look. So what I would suggest, knowing that there was great criticism and skepticalness early on of this process, I think all of these wells and the surrounding water systems should be examined for such contamination. Until that is done, I don't think it's appropriate to come to the conclusion that New Mexico injection wells are operating just fine.
You can't cite me a single example of a.
I'm not familiar. I appreciate the question, and it's an appropriate one. I'm not familiar enough with the literature within the New Mexico community as to whether someone has fingerprinted a leaking injection well. What I can do is say that is an important question, and it's something that we know how to examine it.
Okay. I'll move on because we're really talking about water reuse rather than saltwater disposal wells. Let's talk about the Fairmont brine processing plant.
Absolutely.
Based on the document you gave us this morning, apparently that was an abandoned site. Is that true?
Yeah, the facility stopped operating. I think it was in 2018, and I think the fact that it was abandoned is important. One, it's indicative that this facility did not work. They did not design the facility to have it be shuttered so quickly. But that also the waste left behind was hugely problematic for the state agencies, and it was just left to sit there. At one point, the site actually, there was an explosion on site. I had seen that in a local newspaper and then visited, as I mentioned, with the former Department of Energy scientists. And it was at that point that we realized direct access to the site was possible and that it was deeply contaminated.
So, but the explosion occurred at an abandoned site. It wasn't as a result of activities while the site was in operation.
That's correct.
So it seems to me that perhaps the risk that was posed by that facility was because it was not properly monitored by the regulatory agencies, and they did not insist that it be decommissioned properly.
I think that's an inaccurate reading of the facts. The important revelation here is that the facility had trouble doing their stated task, which was treating produced water. A restaurant goes out of business and there's not necessarily food from the kitchen spewed everywhere. The materials that they were trying to work with proved challenging, and there's evidence all across the facilities and in testimony of the many workers I spoke to that they were unable to do that, and the radiological contamination at the site is very powerful physical evidence. They were unable to do their stated tasks.
But the site was abandoned, yes?
Yeah.
And it was not properly decommissioned. They did not.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, that is correct. Certainly it was not.
And so there was loss of security. They didn't even have, you said it was a party site that folks went to enjoy themselves.
Yeah, yes. Local youth were partying there.
So if the proper authorities had insisted on proper decommissioning, would we still have had that kind of problem?
I guess for me, the difficulty in senior line of thinking is that the site is abandoned and the site is wildly contaminated because they were unable to treat the produced water. So it's not just like saying, if you clean up after you're gone, and that solves the problem. The problem exists is because they were unable to appropriately and safely do what they claimed they could do. And I think another point here is the EPA is still examining this site and figuring exactly how they're going to clean it up. It will likely enter the Superfund program, and cleanup is very sophisticated and challenging in its own right of a site that contaminated. So it's going to take quite some time for appropriate cleanup of that site.
The way we deal with a lot of sites that handle hazardous or radioactive waste is we require them to have a bond, and that if they go out of business, they use the bond to do the remediation, the cleanup. So perhaps something like that should be in our regulations, a bonding requirement for any facility that treats radioactive or hazardous waste.
Absolutely. I think that's a great idea. But again, if a facility were to set up there tomorrow and try to do what that facility is trying to do, which is happening across West Virginia, following the science says they would meet some sort of potentially similar end. So while the bond is important, to me, the greatest issue is the inappropriate attention to the scientific problem at hand. Also, and this is new information, I have recently started a correspondence with ENMRD, and that is the Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources Department, because of course, my question was, are there facilities in New Mexico that are currently treating or recycling or reusing produced water? There are. They conveyed to me that there are 205 facilities, and I'm just going to draw up that exchange because I was really concerned to learn from Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources Department that they do not regularly inspect those facilities. They told me that they have issued one notice of violation. Again, when this is a technically challenging process and it involves some very sophisticated and concerning contaminants, they've issued one notice of violation. Now that can either mean they're all operating absolutely perfectly, which would be great, or as to me is implied by them not regularly inspecting, that they are not really examining thoroughly what may or may not be going wrong at these facilities. And this is where I would start in terms of understanding steps forward. Let's look at the facilities in New Mexico that are already treating, recycling, reusing produced water. Let's tour the facilities. There's simple ways to measure for radioactivity. Let's look for contamination across those sites. Let's talk to the workers there. I think that would be an important first step. But certainly to learn that they weren't being regularly inspected, that was worrisome.
Okay, we'll come back to that. Do you know? I don't like your microphone. Do you know why the Fairmont facility was not successful at treating the produce water?
I don't know scientifically what went wrong there. What I know from speaking to the workers is, and what I know also from talking to scientists, and I believe New Energy Economy will have one of the really one of the global experts on produced water chemistry, is that it is a technically challenging waste stream. It is very difficult to work with, and as you saw, even a facility where there was an investment of hundreds of millions of dollars was not successful in doing it.
Yeah, let's talk about that facility. That was the Clearwater facility by Veolia? That's
correct.
Yeah. How long did it operate?
About 22 months.
22 months. And do you know why that one failed?
Well, we have the reason, as I mentioned, given to the local press was that there was a drop in natural gas prices and it was no longer economical. As I mentioned, I was in touch with workers who were hauling produced water there, and they conveyed to me that the facility was having problems treating the produced water, that there were problems in the processes. When I saw the complaint, and albeit this is one company alleging wrongdoing, but the complaint does provide a little bit of a look under the lid at why that facility was unsuccessful and now remains shuttered. They didn't set up a $300 million facility. Sorry, they did not set up a $300 million facility to shutter it in 22 months.
Do you know if they've decommissioned that facility?
I don't know the present status. It's been very hard to find information from the West Virginia regulators and also from the companies. They are not responsive.
Presumably they're aware of the potential risks for explosion or for...
I cannot speak for them, but there's cause for concern.
So let's, you've cited two examples of treatment facilities where the objective was to recover purified water, whether it was for discharge or potable use, I don't know. And that's not really important to me. But so we've got two facilities that apparently were full-scale facilities. Certainly the Veolia plant was a full-scale facility. Is that right?
By
full-scale meaning that...
Yeah, comprehensive. It was a significant engineering effort.
And it looked like from the size of the photos that the Fairmont was also a full-scale facility.
Yes.
So the proposed regulation we've got is dealing with bench scale and pilot scale projects. Now, the fact that both of these apparently failed, wouldn't that argue for a need that we do bench scale and pilot testing? You've said many times that the science isn't there. How can we develop it if we don't do bench and pilot scale testing?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I agree. My concern is that in looking through the RFIs, it was clear that there was not a sophisticated knowledge, and a sophisticated knowledge is needed. So, other than the one company I mentioned, which presented, a really sophisticated background on the norm, the naturally occurring radioactive materials issue, I would have questions, and as I understand it, the rule as it stands now would enable companies without sophisticated knowledge yet to go forward. And that is where my concern lies. Certainly, we, as you say, it is a technical challenge. We're a nation of entrepreneurs, and it's a challenge that I do believe can be tackled. But the problem here is tackling it, putting a crew, a subpar crew to try and tackle it can lead to major problems. And so I think one has to be very careful in how they enable companies to tackle it and not just open the door.
Well, an RFI, I've responded to many of them. An RFI can generate lots of proposals, and I've seen that list of 34 that you referred to. There's several of those proposals, I think, were just people saw that there was a big pot of money and they thought maybe they could take advantage of it. So
absolutely,
I don't know that that is a representative example of the companies that might actually be interested in putting together a pilot project. But then to go to the regulation again, it specifically states that there will be no discharge to surface or groundwater from a bench or pilot scale project. So I go back to my question, how can we develop technologies to better deal with this waste if we can't do bench and pilot scale testing?
The industry is, there's a curious market force at work here.
I'm sorry, what type of market?
There's a curious market force at work here. So oil field waste has been labeled, defined by the federal government as non-hazardous. It's an extraordinary exemption called the Benson and Bevel Amendments. And it means despite elevated levels of heavy metals, of benzene, of radioactivity, this waste by the letter of US law is non-hazardous. Now, one result of that, one ramification of that, is that companies can set up facilities within communities. You don't necessarily need a community meeting, which that's alarming because the community doesn't have a chance to weigh in on it. But it also invites people, what I would say, without the appropriate knowledge to enter this field, because by the letter of law, it's non-hazardous. I think there's quite a lot of experts who would disagree with that, and they do across the industry and argue that it is quite hazardous. But when you label it non-hazardous, you create an opportunity for it to be treated not so different than an innocuous waste stream. One quick example of that, in Ohio, companies looking to set up a produced water treatment facility would need to obtain what's called a chief's order. A chief's order is from the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, and it's an authorization from the chief of the oil and gas division saying you can do this. It's a one-page form. Their responses might go longer, but it's a one-page form. In answering questions on that, the form to set up a food truck is about 14 pages. So I don't think the states really understand the challenges. Certainly, it's not there in the law. The law enables people without savviness to enter this, and the examples I show portray what that looks like on the ground.
Could you
Can I interrupt, excuse me, and just say for the record the name of the law that you mentioned that determined that they was non-hazardous, and if you could spell it, please, for the record.
Yeah, that's the Benson and Bevel Amendments Exemption. So that's BENTSEN and Bevel, BEVILL. And the exemption pertains to the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, or RCRA.
Chair Thompson, it's noon. Wondering if we should take a lunch break before the 1 p.m. public comment.
Yes. I've got another 15 minutes worth of questions, I think. So
We'll do that after public.
let's take a break.
Thank
you. Thank you.
Thank you so much
for your presentation.
We're going to take a 1 hour lunch break. When we come back at 1, unfortunately, I have to ask you to clear that little table off just for the public comment. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all.